Hello, students. We're here for week 8, Psychology of Adult Development. And let me share the PowerPoint for this lecture. Okay, let me just see if I can. Let's see. All right, give me a minute. Should be okay. Here it is. And it says screen sharing is paused. Okay, wait just a minute. All right, I think I have this under control now. I'm sorry, students. Okay, so we're looking at Learning Unit 6, Intellectual Functioning. Um, and so we are in Chapter 6 of your book, okay? So we're going to be looking at that. Now, listen to the important concepts that I present in this lecture, and then read those important sections of your chapter, okay? So you don't have to know all the information in the chapter for the quiz, but concentrate just on the concepts that I present. Okay. All right. Let me go to the next slide here. Okay. Now, intelligence. If you think about intelligence, it's probably very difficult for you to come up with a definition in words that explains this kind of really abstract concepts. We kind of know who is intelligent when we talk to them, right? Um, and we kind of pick up little features from them concerning, what we think their level of intelligence is. But, how do we define intelligence? There have been lots of attempts to define it. My own idea is that, when I think of intelligent behavior or, intelligent people, they have been able to adapt to new and changing situations really rapidly. Okay. Think about the people in Ukraine right now. Okay. What would you do if some force from outside the country starts to invade your country, right? What would you do? All right. Now, intelligent people will quickly adapt to this threatening situation and think of either ways to, flee to save their family and their lives, or, to fight the incoming forces. Okay. And so this is an adaptation process. We also have these at work. Let's say you get a new job and you need to, learn all about your, fellow coworkers and the supervisory structure and the policies that you have to follow at work and the procedures. People who adapt really rapidly to those and get to understand both the people and the policies are intelligent people. Okay, that's just what I think. If you're able to survive and thrive, even in difficult or turbulent times, that is intelligence. Okay. Now, that's my own view. Does this idea of intelligence fit with yours? Okay. Does my idea of intelligence fit with any models that are talked about in your chapter 6? Okay. Now, one hint, and I've got my book open right now, Sternberg's Components of Intelligence. Okay. Let me read through these really quickly, and maybe you'll get some idea of where adaptation might fit in Sternberg's model. All right, it says Sternberg emphasizes three components of intelligence which work together: contextual, experiential, and information processing. Okay, with regard to the contextual component, how intelligence is defined can vary from culture to culture. from one period of history to another, and from one stage of the lifespan to another. Okay. So, he's talking about cultures, he's talking about history, and also what developmental period you are in. Okay. The experiential component of intelligence takes prior experience into account. The way a person approaches a novel task must be evaluated differently from his or her approach to a familiar task, which is probably carried out more efficiently. Okay. All right. So a novel task might be something that a person has never done before. And then a familiar task is, has been practiced several times, right? So that's the experiential facet. Okay, the information processing component of intelligence focuses on the cognitive aspects of intelligent behavior. These include being able to identify a problem and deploy a strategy to solve it. It's important to look not only at how efficiently the problem is solved, but also at what strategy a person uses to arrive at the correct solution. Okay? So, does my idea about intelligence fit Sternberg's model in some way? Think about that. Okay. Now, Raymond Cattell, and Paul Baltes had some interesting ideas that related to intellectual abilities. All right. Their ideas centered on both the hardware and software of the mind. Okay. So they proposed GF for fluid intelligence, and as your textbook indicates, represents the efficiency of the central nervous system. You can think of how fast you respond to stimuli and how fast you can process information and use numbers and logic. Okay. Now, when you think of speed of processing like this, you would think of how efficiently your neurons in your brain can speed the transmission of signals so that you can process information very quickly. Okay. So, this idea of fluid intelligence represents the cognitive architecture of the mind, if you think about it. Okay. Baltes' mechanics of intelligence idea is closely attuned to this idea of fluid intelligence. This is a genetically and biologically controlled system, and it depends on basic physiologically determined brain functions. So, again, it's the architecture, the building, right? The building blocks in your mind. And those are neurons. How efficiently do they transmit information? And you can speedily process information if those neurons are working properly. And maybe later in older adulthood, they may not be working as efficiently as you might want them to. And so maybe, you think about this, maybe fluid intelligence or the mechanics of intelligence sort of breaks down over time. That's one hypothesis that you might make when you read this slide, right? Okay, now there's another type of intelligence proposed, and that's called crystallized intelligence. You can think of this as the software of your mind. Okay, a computer has hardware, and if the components are working properly, it speedily gets you to the information that you need. But if you think about crystallized intelligence, that's the software that runs on this hardware system. Okay. Now, crystallized intelligence is verbal ability based on experience. Okay. How well you can speak for yourself, how well you can pick up information from language. Okay. That's all verbal ability. And you get that based on experience, right? You start to read when you're in early childhood, and it's kind of clunky at first, right? And you learn to recognize certain words as being symbols of concrete or abstract concepts, right? And you learn that in early childhood. And over time, with experience, you get really good at reading, don't you? And so the software program that's running your reading program in your mind is based on verbal ability. Okay. That's also based on education, right? You learn things in school, and that contributes to your verbal ability and in your culture, right? Certain cultures emphasize social experiences, right? They want you to interact with the crowd, and they want you to interact with friends and family members, right? And so practicing your verbal abilities with others is crucial to building that software program that is based on language. Okay, that's crystallized intelligence. So you can think of these two as being hardware and software. Okay, it says hardware based abilities decline in older adulthood. Okay, and that's true. And your software programs, those software based abilities stay stable over time, even in older adulthood. So you'll find many older adults being able to, speak fluently and interact with others with social facility, right? You probably remember the memory exercise we had from last week, and you saw that older adults, even with problems, in their minds, maybe dementia or early dementia, they were still able to produce language, right, at a pretty good rate. And so you could see that their transcripts were kind of longer than transcripts of younger adults who were recounting their earliest childhood memory. Okay. And so, a couple of students had questions about that. And those are good questions. Okay, let's look at this chart now. You're going to see things that stay stable over time, relatively stable. And then you're going to see things that, steeply decline over the age. So on the x-axis, you can see age, and it goes from the 20s to the 80-year-olds in this chart. And then, they have scores along the y-axis. They're standardized scores, but you can see the color codes, okay? World knowledge, this is kind of your verbal abilities, right? Your vocabulary, your ability to, facilitate language. Those three lines, which are red and kind of yellow and brownish, right, in your chart, they kind of go up, right, all the way into the 70s for a couple of them. And then they start to kind of decline a little bit when you get into, kind of the middle old age or the old age, okay? So it looks like mental abilities stay pretty stable over the lifespan according to this big study. Now, speed of processing, working memory, long-term memory, these things depend on your hardware systems, right, in your mind, your cognitive architecture, how well your neurons are able to transmit information in your mind. And you can see that all these lines declining from the 20s all the way down to the 80s, okay? And so speed of processing, those things decline over the lifespan, okay? You can see that in this chart. All right, there's an interesting little section on the history of intelligence testing. You have in your book, and I'm looking at it now, a brief history of the test movement, okay? And the book starts to describe, how a French researcher named Bene decided to classify children according to, their mental abilities. And so he had kind of a practical problem in mind, and that is, should we put certain students in normal classrooms, and should we put other certain students in kind of a developmentally delayed program, right, to kind of support their needs, okay? And so this kind of movement started in France in the at the turn of the 20th century, according to your book. Okay. So we have this Stanford Bene test that came out of that early testing movement, and it was based on a practical kind of idea. How do we support students in elementary and middle schools, okay, or junior highs? All right, and that was a French effort. Now, Americans started to think about practical problems related to soldiers and the military, okay? And so people here in America developed the Army Alpha test in 1917 to kind of classify the mental abilities of recruits who were coming into the various services, and they wanted to know, who is officer material and who is not. Okay, that's kind of the basic practical problem that they faced. And so they developed this Army Alpha test, and it, proved to be a pretty successful way of looking at mental abilities of recruits. Okay, so two practical problems, and they were solved by coming up with intelligence tests, early intelligence tests. Okay. Now there's the Thurstone test that's described in your book, and you can read about that. But probably the most famous intelligence test produced by researchers was by David Wechsler, okay, in 1955. And he was working in New York at one of the mental health centers there. And he wanted to come up with ways of testing the mental abilities of not only normal people, but also people who suffered from kind of abnormal problems. Okay. And so he developed this test with many subscales. Some were based in verbal abilities, and some were based in speed of processing, okay, etc. And this test, it's called a Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, the WAIS, WAIS, and it's been used for now many years, okay, since 1955. All right, so that's the Wechsler test. You can look at all these and see their strengths and their faults, okay? There was kind of pushback against a book that was written in 1979 that looked at differences in racial achievement on intelligence, because that was a very controversial book that showed that white people, um, produced really high results on these intelligence tests versus people of other races or ethnicities. Okay, and so there was big pushback on that book. I think it was called the normal curve or something like that. And after that, people decided that we should develop culturally normed tests for many different types of people. Okay, because why would white people do better on these intelligence tests? Well, they were designed, right, and implemented by white researchers. Okay, so that's a problem, isn't it? Because when you're measuring a diverse set of people, lots of different people, you have to think of cultural kind of constrained ideas in terms of testing. Okay, so we either need culture specific kinds of intelligence tests, or we need one that is acultural. Okay, in other words, a person from any culture could take the test, and it wouldn't be biased against a certain group of people when they take the test. Okay, so these have been the trials and tribulations of intelligence testing, and there are many kinds of controversial findings that have been published in the intelligence area. Okay, I think it was called the bell curve. Okay, you might look up, on the internet, what was the bell curve and what was the controversy involved in intelligence testing in 1979. All right, now think about intelligence across the adult lifespan. Okay, Now, we talked about, maybe verbal abilities or vocabulary should stay relatively stable across the lifespan because we practice and practice our communication skills and we read, okay, and we learn and we get better at mental abilities in terms of verbal abilities across our lifespan. Whereas things that deal with speed and depend on the hardware of our mind, our neurons, decline over time. Okay. So we're not as fast at 80 years old as we were at 20 years old in processing information, quickly. All right. All right. Now, in your textbook, we have a couple of researchers called Berg and Sternberg. Okay. I mentioned Sternberg earlier, but they talk about interest in and ability to deal with novel situations. Okay. So conceptions by a sample indicated this is important in young adulthood, but less important later on in life. All right. And so, we have lots of novel kinds of situations in early life that we deal with and we learn to adapt to, right? But as we get older, we've seen a lot of stuff already, and situations are not as novel as they used to be. And so I guess novelty is more important in younger adulthood than older adulthood. Okay. All right. Now, common sense. That's another area that, intelligence researchers have talked about, and, in Berg and Sternberg's work. Okay. And verbal competence. Okay. This is considered more important later in adulthood. If you think about common sense in a person in terms of a mental ability and not book knowledge, okay, we're just talking about common sense. It seems like it's more important in later adulthood, okay. We would hope that older folks would have more common sense, right, than younger adults, although I don't know. I've seen lots of kind of exceptions to that rule as I meet other older adults and gauge their common sense mental abilities. Okay. Now these ideas are tied to that fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence talked about in Cattell and Balti's work. Okay. So read about these. All right, that's all for this week, and I'll see you next week. And have a good week. Okay. See you later.